We're broadcasting at davidrovics.com/quarantine on the Facebook pages of Popular Resistance and Cebu Community Radio, as well as via my channels on YouTube, Periscope, Twitch, VK, and LinkedIn. You can find all of these discussions archived on my YouTube channel in the Discussions with David playlist and in podcast form if you look for This Week with David Rovics on any podcasting platform or go to davidrovics.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests on my show, or if you're involved in some way with a social media account that might be a good place from which to live stream my discussions, I am very interested in guest suggestions, and I have the capacity to add additional platforms to the broadcast. Today's guest is a man I heard of long before I met him. I believe it was on my first visit to Belfast that someone introduced me to Pol Mac Adam's music in the form of a treasured but barely audible recording. He was more a legend than a musician to me and many others at that point. The sort of musician who always had an escape route planned for every gig, it was said. You can find a bit of Paul's gorgeous music on streaming platforms, but only a bit. If you want to hear Paul's music, you basically have to go to Ireland and hang out in the right pubs and buy a CD at the show. While Pol Mac Adaim doesn't have much of a presence on the internet, in the hearts and minds of many people in his native land and elsewhere, he has a reputation that would seem impossible to live up to until you actually meet him. I've not only had the pleasure of meeting Pol Mac Adaim on a number of occasions, but I spent a week staying with him in a house with a recording studio in it, surrounded by green hills with grazing sheep on them in the Cooley Mountains of Ireland last fall, along with a couple other wonderful musicians. Paul is unquestionably one of the best players of Irish traditional music you will ever hear. A master of all forms of whistles, pipes, drums, and stringed instruments with a hauntingly beautiful singing voice. That's only the beginning of his wildly varied skill set. Paul is also a fantastic topical songwriter, as well as an expert audio engineer, producer, butcher, chef, and marksman. Pol Mac Adaim, welcome to my little live stream show.
That's some introduction. Thank you for having me on the show, David.
Thank you. First off, can you just, I know it's the question I'm always asking everybody, but it's a strange time where in the world, everywhere in the world, people are to some extent experiencing the same thing, even if it's maybe the different boats in the same storm, but some variation of the same thing. And what's it been like for you there in the mountains in Ireland? You've had all your gigs canceled, tours canceled. Tell us about your reality as a musician at the moment.
We went into lockdown on the 16th of March. I went into lockdown maybe 4 or 5 days before that. And where I'm located, as you know, it's a cottage. It's on the hills. It's by the sea. It's pretty remote. It's out of the way. Much of the time, I live a hermit kind of life anyway. I do have people that come and go every week, but a lot of the time it's been here alone. I've actually enjoyed the peace and quiet to some extent, but as you say, it's scary times. That there are people that have had the virus locally, and people have died locally. I know a couple of people who've lost loved ones as a result. So while I'm lucky in many respects. I'm not in a small apartment in a block of flats like some people have been. I'm unable to go anywhere. Now the lockdown's starting to ease now, but for a while there, people were basically being harassed by Crown forces, or else the Southern Irish Gardaí, which is a form of policing. They had set up a number of checkpoints around the area. People were being stopped and questioned, and boots and cars and that were being searched. Just if people weren't out getting essential things, basically they were being fined. So, but that has since wound up, and people are allowed to travel a bit more. We weren't allowed to travel any more than 2 kilometers from our homes. Now we're allowed to travel 5 kilometers. We're also allowed to meet with a number of people, but there has to be solidarity distancing. So now
Solidarity distancing, is that a common term these
I
days over there? You just prefer it. Yeah, I
prefer
like
to
it.
the other term
I like it.
that's being used, you know. So
Solidarity distancing.
so we're doing that, and the infection rate has dropped according to the stats that they're giving us.
Right.
They have been caught out a few times telling fibs.
These statistics seem to often be inaccurate in many different countries, and all over this country, it's like it very much seems to depend on the state whether the statistics have any accuracy.
Well, there's a
But
lot of things that could have been done where the spread of the virus could have been avoided, but the government failed to step up to the mark and do something. For example, there were 30,000 Italian fans that came over to Ireland for a match that was cancelled, and that was when there was an outbreak in Italy, and it was, you know, it was doing the rounds there, and that brought the virus into the country. And then, of course, there was Cheltenham over in England. A lot of people contracted the virus there also. So the government failed in a number of respects. They could have basically prevented people from coming over, close things down, like other places have done. New Zealand did an excellent job in comparison to a lot of other places. So did Vietnam.
Vietnam, very impressive.
Yeah, it's, you know, how have things been over there?
Oh, it's over here. I mean, it's been terrible in a lot of places. But it depends so much on who you are and your position in life, and it's been devastating for the so-called essential or otherwise known as expendable workers, mainly from Black and Brown communities for all kinds of different reasons. Farm workers are being especially hard hit, and bus drivers and medical workers of all kinds, and it's been the worst has been in some of the poorest, most densest neighborhoods in New York and Detroit, and yeah, it's just what you'd expect in a failed state.
Yeah. Well, we've had over 200,000 people have lost their jobs here in the 26 counties. That's increasing. Businesses are collapsing. The pubs have been closed since the 16th of March.
Are they being sort of subsidized? Of course, unheard of. But like I've heard in other European countries, like they are sort of paying the way for all the businesses and workers, like certain percentage of their wages and rents and whatever else, just to kind of keep things on an even keel until things are over. But they're not doing that kind of thing here, and I don't know if they're doing that kind of thing there.
Well, they are to an extent doing that here. There have been. I've got a friend who's a musician, but also runs a small business. It's a glamping site that he has where people can go and camp. He basically got, I think it was 10,000 sterling to see him through, which he was quite happy with because he doesn't normally make that in the season anyway.
Right.
So,
good.
But you know, a lot of people have lost their jobs and are finding it difficult to get by.
How about for musicians?
Musicians, everything basically is gone. There's no gigs. There's no recording. I can record here maybe, you know, but people aren't allowed to travel. If two people are caught in a car, for example, and they live in different addresses, they're fined. Some people have actually been sent to jail. Things that have happened, but that there's where they've stopped someone and the person's maybe being drunk or whatever and get out of hand, slap the cop or whatever.
Yeah,
I can kind of understand.
Yeah. It just reminds me of the night that one of the nights we had a gig together in nearby town and somebody came in and said, you might want to wait a little while before you leave because the kids are throwing fireworks at the cops again. And and that just gave me a little like, oh yeah, okay, good. We're in the right place.
Yeah. We're used to that kind of thing, and the cops are used to that kind of thing too. Usually they get a lot worse things fired up, and they're fired
a lot worse.
again, you know?
And
So,
speaking of which, I wanted to, and also speaking about crowded apartment blocks, I just wanted to ask you about a lot of things, which we won't even get to talk about in an hour because an hour goes by too quickly. But I just wonder for those people, which is probably the vast majority listening, who did not grow up in the occupied 6 counties. You grew up in Ardoyne, which is a very special place in Belfast that is surrounded by hostile neighborhoods. And I know it's a big, huge question, but can you just give us a few minutes painting a picture of what it was like to be a small child growing up in Ardoyne in the time that you grew up there, which was
the
during
70s,
the
in the
70s?
70s, during the most intense period um, of the armed struggle. I don't like to use the term the Troubles. The
No.
Troubles is a term that was invented by the British to play down what was going on here. They basically wanted the world to see it as an internal police problem they were having, but it was an armed insurrection. It was a resistance to the occupation. As a child, um, growing up in the streets of Ardoyne in North Belfast, I had what I would call a happy childhood. It wasn't normal, but for me, it was. And things like tanks and jeeps passing by and convoys, army convoys or patrols were normal. It was an everyday thing. You would hear the distinct uh, whistling, rumbling noises of the APCs as they would drive up and down the streets. And the soldiers, for example, they when they were out on patrol, they made a point of trying to befriend the kids, and this is something that I learned at a very early age when I was first shown an SLR, which is a self-loading rifle. It's a 7.62 caliber rifle that was standard issue for British Army. It was based on the FN model, but the FN FAL that is, and I first saw one of those when I was 4 years old, and I was just about to leave school, and there was an army patrol that had just stopped outside the school, and of course they were surrounded by kids, and of course there were kids saying, "Give us a look at that rifle. Give us a look," and the soldiers like letting them, showing them the gun and that, but not letting them take it, kind of thing. And that's when I basically got a close-up look at an assault rifle. But things like the smell of burning cars would be quite frequent. There would be riots. Nighttime, you would often hear the assault rifles going off, IRA and British Army exchanging fire. And like I say, it was very normal. Going out to throw stones, you would go out and we would all practice our stone throwing. We would learn how to make Molotovs and things at very early ages because that's what we saw people do. So that was normal for us. And we had a few accidents with the Molotovs, but thankfully nobody got badly burned. Maybe have been one or two old premises that really ended up burned, but that was just the way you did it. We were going about trying to experiment on how to basically deliver a Molotov successfully at an early age. That's what we did. It was normal.
And when you say when you describe your childhood as happy, it's the kind of happiness that comes out of a community sticking together in solidarity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's something about that even with the burning cars and the soldiers and all the fear that must have also been there on a regular basis. There was also this happiness, this community.
The thing about Ardoyne that I love most was the camaraderie and the community. We were surrounded by unionist areas, and our district would often be patrolled by loyalist death squads. These are death squads that were set up by the British war machine. They were financed by them, they were armed by them, trained, and even assisted on operations where they would drive around our districts selecting targets at random. Some weren't so random. Some were Republicans, but most of the people that were killed were just ordinary working class Catholics, and that's the reason why they were targeted. Basically, the British wanted to maintain a unionist stroke Protestant majority in the 6 counties, and the best way to do that would be to terrorise the communities. In Ardoyne, that brought us closer together, and it gained notoriety by producing some of the most dedicated and fearless combatants who emerged from the armed struggle. People, and I'm proud to say that were my generation and the generation before me. We did lose a lot of people, yes, and that hurt, and it still does hurt. It's still very much alive. The memory of the war is very, very much alive. But I feel a great sense of pride because I grew up to be among those people, to walk with those heroes.
Can you move a little closer to the mic like you were? It was easier to hear you, even though okay. Yeah, that's great. I know it's a little close to the screen, but the audio is better anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. But as I was saying, in Ardoyne, people watched out for each other, and if someone was to come into the district that people didn't recognise, they were quick to home in on them and figure out whether they were a threat or not. Even to this day, it's 1998 was the agreement. The provisional IRA ceasefire was in 1996. That's 24 years ago. But even to this day, if you go through Ardoyne, you'll feel eyes on you. People are still watching. They're still worried. It's still there.
Paul, when did you first visit somebody in prison?
First person I visited in prison was my brother, Gary, and I would have been around 11 years old. Gary had been jailed for the hijacking of a bus. I think it was the hijacking of a bus during a riot, and he was sentenced to 4 years in Hyde Young Offenders Centre, and that was his first spell in jail. Gary went on to visit almost every one of the special category jails here, the high security jails. But that was the first time I went, and I would go and see him. I would go and see him once a month. And then, of course, the other brothers ended up going to jail, so I spent a lot of my childhood, and my teens in particular, going to jails to visit my brothers.
They were all in prison at the same time?
Yes, there was a period when they were all in prison at the same time. And that was during my teens. They were all in jail at the same time. And Gary would have been, I think Gary was sentenced to a total of 23 years or 24 years. He served, I think, 14 or 15 of those years. But like I say, he started off in Hyde Bank, and then he went from there to the Crumlin Road jail, which was an old, if you use the term, but Victorian jail, it's a British jail. It was a horrible jail. Hyde Bank would have been recently built. I think it would have been built in the late 70s. I could be wrong. But the Crumlin Road was much older. It was like stone wall and damp and stank. It stank of urine and sweat, and there was cockroaches and rats and mice, and it was like hard time.
Just like all that you imagine a sort of Dickensian prison to be like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And all was cold. All my brothers lived there at one stage or another in the Crumlin Road. And then Neil went to Limavady jail up north there. He was transferred away. And then Gary ended up in Port Leisure, which is a very high security jail in the 26 counties. That's what people call the Irish Republic, but it's not an Irish Republic. It's 26 county, free state. And it's a high security jail that's built in an army camp. So if you escape out of the jail, you immediately find yourself in an army base. So
that's not good. There's a lot of prisons like that here in the U.S. where there's a prison within a prison. Like a friend I visited when he was in Texas a lot before he got transferred to Connecticut, but the prison in Texas was a prison within a prison. So yeah, it was like they call it a communications management unit here.
Yeah, you don't get much high security than that, really.
No.
So Gary ended up there doing a couple of spells, and then Graham ended up in McGabry, that's in the north, and then I ended up for a brief spell in McGabry also, just on remand, but I was fortunate to get out.
You were what?
Stay.
You were still a teenager.
No, that was in my 20s. I ended up in McGabry. I was very fortunate out of all the brothers that I didn't end up getting handed down a sentence. So I'm the only son in my family that was never sentenced.
And, of course, for anybody not familiar, when you're talking about the 26 counties, we're talking about the Republic of Ireland. The 6 counties, we're talking about what they call Northern Ireland. And I just, for when you mentioned your brother getting a long prison sentence for hijacking a bus, I think it's just interesting note, I think, to mention what an important tactic bus hijacking has been over the decades in urban guerrilla warfare, and how useful that is. I mean, I didn't realize until after spending time with you and then reading about the pogroms of 1969 in Belfast and elsewhere in the 6 counties, and how if not for people hijacking 50 buses and surrounding Ardoyne with burning buses, the death toll would have been far higher. And of course, hijacking buses can also, of course, a very large vehicle that can be used for many other purposes. But the defensive purpose, they make a great barricade.
Yeah, but Gary got 4 years for the hijacking of the bus. He was also sent down for a number of other things: possession of weapons, bank robbery. These were all politically motivated.
Of course, you need money to run a guerrilla movement. Yeah,
absolutely. And Graham,
where else to get it? Where best to get it than from the bankers? This makes perfectly good sense, really.
The bankers are the folks that are causing the world the problems,
Yeah.
You just you pay them a visit and you say, here, let's have some of that till we sort this out.
But also, Paul, that kind of leads me to another question, though, because you're talking about the problems with the banks in capitalism generally, and that's not necessarily. I mean, it seems it's common to have a sort of a solid left-wing analysis among revolutionary movements, but it's not universal. And I wonder if in the chat rooms and in Reddit and many spaces in the internet, there's a lot of different Irish organizations and historical groups that have a really outsized role in the discussion as in the minds of a lot of people, for very good reason. But tell us, when people are talking about INLA, what is the INLA?
The Irish National Liberation Army was a group that was formed during a split in the 1970s from the official IRA. There was the IRA basically up until 1970, and that was the IRA that was born out of the War for Independence, and which happened back in the 20s. And up until 1970, there was just basically the IRA, and then there was a split in that movement which gave birth to the Provisional IRA, and then another hemorrhage within that movement which gave birth to the Irish National Liberation Army. Irish National Liberation Army would be the most left-wing. The official IRA ended up being Marxist, but they decided to have hold a ceasefire and to basically approach things here through elections, take the constitutional path, which didn't really work for them. It worked for a short period of time, but then they're in the wilderness now. They're hardly heard of. But the Irish National Liberation Army was founded, I think, in 1974, and they were Marxist-Leninist, and they wanted a 32-county socialist republic. The Provisional IRA also, well, around that time, they were talking about a socialist republic, but you heard less and less of talk of the socialist republic from the Provisional IRA as the years went on. So, for example, would have been their slogan would have been for an independent Ireland, for a 32-county socialist republic, for united Ireland, for freedom, peace and justice, unto now where you have an island of equals. So it's not quite as clear-cut a dialectic as the Irish National Liberation Army would be. I hope that explains it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
The Irish National Liberation Army was basically born out of a lot of the very poor, run-down slum areas. People like, for example, Mickey Devine, who died in the 1981 hunger strike. He was the last hunger striker. He lived in a place called, I think it was Spring Hill Camp, outside Derry, which was an old army base, and there was a lot of poverty there. There was a lot of disease, and unemployment was rife. So you're talking, the British basically, when they saw an upsurge of resistance from 1969 on, they began an economic warfare on our communities, basically. Now, before that, the Catholic nationalists, they were being treated like second-class citizens. Then, of course, you had the civil rights movement and that led to Bloody Sunday and so on and so forth. But Catholics weren't getting good jobs, weren't getting good housing, and basically the Provisional IRA arose out of those, and so did the Irish National Liberation Army. And like I say, the British were waging economic warfare on our districts, and this was starving people into betraying their own people. This is how they created a breeding ground for informants and for agents, and it got very dirty, very dirty. People who had known people for a long, long time, to discover that their best friend or even family members had become agents, informers, or so. And then, of course, when that happened, when that came to the surface, that had to be dealt with, and that meant executions. Agents basically cost people their lives. They cost people their liberty. People in the community were either dying or suffering, rotting in hellholes as a result of this treachery. So that was, war is horrible.
It's terrible, and when we're talking about so many different, whether we're talking about like guerrilla warfare or just militant social movements, from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to the rent strike of the 1840s in upstate New York, you find to the rent strike in Roscommon in 1901, which I was just reading about a few days ago. Fascinating, but all these different situations, one of the common threads you find when movements get big enough and powerful enough is there is always this element of treachery that the movement has to deal with. There's always of course the necessity to deal with betrayal on such a regular basis, and that it's something that comes up again and again, which I think for anybody that's I don't know what the future holds at this moment, but it's quite a precipice we're on, and I think there's going to be a lot of big social movements in a lot of places coming out of this historical moment, and there's going to be a lot of people having to deal with a lot of treachery, and that's just how it is, huh?
It's par for the course. That's the way it is. It's when you live through that Um, I suppose it's like everywhere. You're gonna see horrible, ugly things, but you're also going to see very beautiful things too, David.
Mm-hmm.
You you find goodness in the strangest of places too, where it's least expected, and you see people do wonderful, beautiful things that you just wouldn't expect. People do wonderful things, but people do horrible things too and more.
But a lot of
It really,
people rise to the occasion and really in amazing ways as well under pressure. That's also
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Our district in Ardoyne anyway, they certainly did. They stood their ground. They suffered terribly for it, but they stood their ground. It's still there.
Paul, when did you get into playing music, and how did that was it just you were born with it, or was there a moment where you're like, this is what I have to obsess about for the next several decades? I mean, you're not only, I mean, you're an amazing musician, and you're also you play many different instruments really, really well, and that's I mean, that's an incredibly time consuming, for just to say nothing of the talent involved, but the amount of time. I mean, when did you start getting into spending massive amounts of your time playing instruments?
When I was 9 years old, I had a school teacher whose name was Ethel Cosgrove, and he would teach us the Gaelic language in our class, which we weren't supposed to be taught, and we were only supposed to be taught the English language. And Ethel was a traditional Irish musician. He played the whistle and the flute, and he introduced me to the tin whistle. Basically, I was at primary school, and the music teacher did a test on us and said, "Well, your hearing's so good, you could probably try an instrument." So she sent me to Ethel because I was a, a, a troublesome child, so to speak. It was a difficult one.
She sent you
And
to what?
she sent me to see Ethel, my teacher. My music teacher sent me to see my regular teacher. We would have like a PE teacher, music teacher, and then you would have your regular teacher. So my regular teacher was a traditional musician, and he introduced me to the tin whistle, and I fell in love with it from there. Um, I would play the tin whistle, walking to school, coming back from school, in the house, driving everyone mad. And
Great.
then from there, uh, I continued playing the whistle, teaching myself after Ethel had left. He had actually been removed from the school because he was teaching us the Irish language, and that was basically a no-no. So he lost his
Wow.
job. He
But
lost his
you
job.
were going to a public Catholic school? Is that, I mean,
Yes.
for people that are not from that your part of the world, I think to me it's shocking actually, and worth noting that the state in the north of Ireland administers schools that are Catholic or Protestant in their. I mean, this is a state-sanctioned sort of religious education, and
Yes.
I mean, I still
Yes.
have trouble getting my head around it, but this is how it is.
That's described perfectly. Now the school that I'm talking about is outside of Belfast. We moved outside of Belfast because we were put out of our home. We'd moved from Ardoyne into the Old Park Road, which is another part of North Belfast. But we were put out of our home by loyalist death squads who were going to shoot my father and my two brothers. So we had to leave. So I ended up in Southampton. That's where that school was, and you weren't supposed to be taught the Gaelic language. So I heard that he had been removed from the school and that he had ended up in a mental institution. I don't know what happened, but he ended up in a mental institution. And this was some years later. But
Mm.
getting back to uh, learning the instruments, I stopped playing the whistle for a few years. I think
Mm.
it was between 9 and then 11. I was playing the whistle, and then I stopped. I think it might have had something to do with the incarceration of my brother Gary.
Mm.
when he was jailed. And
You
then
just didn't feel like playing music?
I loved Gary. Gary was my hero. Of all my brothers, I always looked up to Gary.
Mm.
And when he was jailed, it broke my heart.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to go and see him as a kid and to leave him
Yeah.
every time at the visit. It was very hard on me. But I took up the whistle again at the age of 14 or 15, and then I picked up the guitar. And that was my brother Neil. Neil had been jailed also, and he'd been released and taught me the guitar. He had learned the guitar for a long time. He just played guitar. He didn't sing much. Sang a little, but he got me to sing then. And then, of course, with my brothers being in the jails, I had time to myself. You see, they were all in jail at the same time for a short period, but we were never under the same roof together as brothers for almost 15 years because someone was in a jail somewhere. Maybe one brother, maybe two, maybe three. So I had the time and the space to pick up the other instruments. I started with the whistle at 9, the guitar at the age of 15, and then the mandolin, and then tenor banjo, and then I went into a whole lot of different things like bazookas and things.
Mm-hmm.
But
And pipes, the pipes must have been, I mean, is that if you
pipes were
play the
later.
whistle, is it moving to the Alan pipes really made, I mean, there's a lot of knowledge that can transfer? Or,
Well, the thing is, the tin whistle and the traditional flute are basically the finger motions are the same, more or less. Or you might have to hold the flute to the side, the whistle to the front of you, and you blow into the flute at an angle where the whistle you just put it into your mouth and that. But they have similar notation to the Uilleann pipes. Not exactly the same. The Uilleann pipes play a lot more notes, and the ornaments from our tradition, whether it be the fiddle or whether it be the whistle or the flute or the banjo, the ornaments come from the pipes. All the ornamentations from that instrument. It's the most difficult instrument out of them all to play, and one of the most difficult instruments in the world to play. I play them not very well. I've been playing them for a number of years. There are papers out there that are really good papers, you know.
you play it so well. Oh my
But
goodness. Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
I try my best, David. I try my best. But
And
I took up the pipes when I was in my, what age would I have been? Mid to late 20s.
mm-hmm.
I took them up then, and I I fell in love with them. I've always loved the pipes, but I always wanted to be able to play them, but I was terrified of the instrument because I'd heard, you could basically get 21 year learning on this instrument. This with
Mm-hmm.
7 years learning, 7 years practice, and 7 years playing. To say,
I mean,
before
it's
you,
like 7 years just before you can actually play in tune on that. It seems like. I mean, it's just a not a forgiving instrument at all.
no,
But
all
when
the
you get
reeds
good
are
at it, it's just amazing.
the reeds are all handmade, and it's only in recent years where they've managed to introduce the semi-synthetic reed, which makes it that bit easier to play.
Mm.
But basically, the pipes will play when they want to play.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've learned from the pipes. Not when you want them to play. You know.
Right.
So I was at a funeral last Saturday of an old Republican who had died, a legend of an Irish Republican who fought the British in the last armed struggle. He lost his life to the virus, and I was asked to pipe. Um, Basically, when the remains leave the house, you play the Uilleann pipes. But the Uilleann pipes are not outdoor pipes, they're indoor pipes. So because of the temperature change, and there was a slight mizzle of rain in the air, the reeds were really giving me trouble. So it was nerve-wracking because my comrade, this guy's like a brother to me, had asked me, would you pipe for my father, please? And it's in the middle of a pandemic. I understand that, if you just say no, I'll understand. And I said, I can't turn you down. I have to do that. This is a legend. We have to give him the proper traditional revolutionary burial that he deserves.
Mm.
So, normally there would be 10 people at a funeral because of the virus, and they have to practice social distancing. It turned out there were hundreds, and the majority of them were practicing social distancing and that. But basically, the people of the street came out into their gardens,
Mm.
and when I finished the lament on the pipes, I just managed to get through it.
Mm.
But David, when you're in that moment, everyone's listening, everything's focused on you,
Mm.
right? And your nerves are really shattered. They're being shattered because of this instrument, right?
Yeah.
So you don't know if this thing's going to play or not. And I've actually been at another funeral a few years ago in Ardoyne where the instrument just said, "No, I'm not having it."
Oh no.
And I've had to look at them and say, "Look, they're not going to play because of the weather conditions." Ireland's known for the rain and the cold and that. Apart from the pandemic, where it's been absolutely beautiful.
Right.
During this lockdown, I've never seen weather like this.
Of course.
It may have something to do with the fact that they've removed all those jumbo jets out of the air.
Mm.
There's a lot less pollution. I don't know. But what
Who
I do know
knows?
is we're getting great weather now. But getting back to the pipes at that funeral, the people came out in their hundreds, and when I finished the lament, I could hear people breaking down.
Yeah.
Tears, the emotions really
Yeah.
high, and then it just lifted with an applause, a huge applause,
Mm.
and his remains were taken away, and I just thought, thank you, pipes, thank you, pipes.
So good. Yeah. Thank you, pipes. Oh, beautiful. Paul, when did you first get into writing songs? You've written some gorgeous songs, including one of the most beautiful songs about a prisoner who was executed in the United States that you wrote some years ago.
Troy Davis.
Troy
Thank you.
Davis.
Coming from you, that's a lot because you are a super duper songwriter.
It's a gorgeous song.
I get into songwriting. Started toying with it in my late teens. But I'm not as prolific a writer as you. You can just knock them out, and you just knock out one gem after another.
Thank you.
I basically, I think it's probably because I have a lot of other musical things that are going on in my head, maybe, or maybe just a lot of other madness that's in my head. I don't know.
Yep,
I
sure.
don't write as often as yourself.
I don't write as much since I started broadcasting either. I mean, there's so many different things you can do, like becoming a multi-instrumentalist, for example. It all uses the same creative juices, I think. So it's like there's only 24 hours in a day.
Yes, and we've only one set of hands in that, and there's only so much that we can do. But yeah, around my late teens, I started writing, and then I I didn't have much confidence in it, David. My confidence wasn't great about it. And then later 20s, I started writing, and then I started gaining a bit more confidence about it, and then into my 30s. And I think from my late 20s to the 30s, where I've bore most fruit as regards songs. As you know, I spent a lot of time in studios also, working with other artists, training to become an audio engineer and a producer. So that takes up an awful lot of time. And aside of that, I'd be involved in organising political actions, demonstrations and whatnot. You know, benefits and fundraisers and things for the movement or the prisoners or their families. And, I've always been there with the struggle. The struggle's been ongoing, and the music and the struggle I see as one. I've managed to use whatever talent I have to try and be a voice for the oppressed, whether it be here or whether it be Palestine, or anywhere.
And you've done quite a lot of international traveling, speaking of Palestine. And one of the fascinating things about being involved with a sort of what is often sort of well, what is a movement for national liberation, but it's also being part of any kind of a revolutionary struggle, or even just a social movement that has global implications. You end up meeting people from so many different places, and I think that's more true of you than it is of many people. And you've got a lot of yeah, I don't even know where to start about asking about your perspective on struggles in Turkey or Spain. But what was it like when you first left Ireland and lived abroad for a while? I know there must have been a lot of pros and cons to that experience, and I don't know if it brought about any particular perspective, but I know it was you
Great question.
you eventually stopped looking under the hood of your car every
Yeah,
time you got
well,
into it.
the first time I left Ireland to live abroad, I went to London of all places. I was 18, and I saw how other people lived. Now, London, I didn't find London to be a welcoming city, especially for someone with my accent. I have a broad Belfast accent, and basically there were advertisements and all that, you know, watch out for this accent and all. And if you see this kind of these people behaving suspiciously, and call this number, the confidential thing and all that. But I got the first taste of a normal kind of life without occupation, without, you know, troops on the streets and heavily armored uh, jeeps carrying heavily armored police and checkpoints and searches and, you know, constant raids and things. So that was the first taste. I suppose the real taste came later in life when I moved to Scandinavia. Having said that, when I lived in London, I still maintained my security. We were always security conscious because Irish in London, in particular, were subjected to raids, and of course, you could end up spending the rest of your life in a jail, whether you did something or not. You know, guilty of 4, Birmingham 6, so on and so forth. You know,
Yeah.
but when I got to Scandinavia, then uh, that was a real experience as well. Oh, I also lived in the Balearics, Spain before that, and that gave me a taste. But like you say about the vehicles, I didn't take a vehicle to London. I didn't take a vehicle to the Balearics, but I took a vehicle to Sweden. And even though I was out in the wilderness, I had an old cottage. It was wooden cabin, basically, that was built in 1905, out in the forests of North Sweden, where there aren't many people about. Uh, I was still checking my car for the first 18 months it was there with booby trap devices. You know, my brother had survived a booby trap mercury tilt device that had been planted under his car. It could have taken him and his 3 children. That had been planted there by a pro British paramilitary group that were heavily infiltrated and ran by British agents. Like I say, these groups they were out to do the dirty work of the British war machine. So we had to check for booby traps all the time. We couldn't keep a routine. We couldn't hold a job because going there, coming back at the same time, people in our district were being shot, executed. So there was high unemployment, you know, in the district. There was high unemployment generally, but people didn't want to work because it was dangerous.
Yeah. That sounds kind of
And
familiar in a way, except now it's people don't want to work because it's they're worried about getting sick. But it's just it just
yes,
reminds me of a
yes,
lot of the conversation going on right
that's a
now.
very interesting point. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, people, we generally stuck to our own districts. We didn't really get out of it, and you know that meant building our bars in our own districts. People wouldn't go in to the city centre, and that they only
So
really began to go into the city centre after the ceasefire.
did you say that people who have grown up with the kinds of experiences you've grown up with are much more well suited to lockdown than your average person?
Absolutely. I've now, because of my location, I'm not in a built-up area, but uh, I've managed quite well with this lockdown, and I don't really notice a lockdown. And when we were in the districts, uh, we were pretty much under curfew of that. There were curfews. It was dangerous to go out into the streets. People would be arrested or shot. So we were used to that. But as kids, you know, we were always up to no good as well. A lot of things are different now, in that you've got this distancing and people being afraid of people in many respects. We
Do you
we
get that
had
feeling that it does feel? I mean, they talk about social distancing, and people want to use the term physical distancing, but when you go out around here, I mean, there's lots of people who are nice and friendly and everything, but it just is generally the general atmosphere is people are afraid of each other. Is that
no,
you get that feeling?
there's basically a plague that's doing the rounds. It's a
Yeah,
horrible disease. It's a horrible, lonely death for people.
yeah.
And I've spoken to a few people who've lost loved ones, and like I say, I've been to a funeral where it's been a coronavirus has caused the death, and people don't want to get it. People don't want other people to get it. They don't want to carry it. They don't want to pass it on. So in some respects, yes, um, we can deal with this kind of thing. We're used to living under occupation. We're used to being forced into our homes. We've been through it. The circumstances are like some of them are similar, but also somewhat different.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Paul, you there in the Cooley Mountains, you also have, in addition to having this wonderful recording studio, part of the project there is also to help look after the wounded hearts and minds of veterans. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Well, we have a collective farm here, and it's normally run by about 4 or 5 different comrades. Obviously, because of the lockdown, that's not happening, and I'm basically doing everything to try and keep things going, and I'm managing them. I'm on top of things.
The
It's keeping
farming,
me.
you've been doing a lot more
I've been
gardening than
doing
usual.
a lot more, and it's keeping me fit too.
Yeah.
Keeping me out of trouble. But yes, this is a place where comrades can come and they can have a break. They can do some gardening if they want. They can hike the mountains. They can visit the beaches and enjoy the tranquility, the peace, and the beauty. It's a beauty spot. It's absolutely beautiful here, and quite a few comrades have came through here. We've helped people that have been deeply traumatized, uh, have experienced extreme violence during the war, in particular, whether it be people who've been shot, wounded, survived, or people who've been jailed, tortured, or because there was a lot of torture that went on, a lot of interrogation that went on. Uh, so yes, it's a wee place where people can come and get away, a wee bit of respite.
Paul, do you care to make any wild guesses at what the world might look like, say, in a few months?
That's a great question.
I know it's way too big a question, but it's
Well,
just I have to ask.
there's what I see that's on the horizon, and then there's the potential of what could be, depending on people. Um, the people are basically they're going to have more austerity forced onto them, more wage slavery. I don't like to use the word austerity because it's basically class war. It's basically the rich waging class war on the poorer classes and forcing people into working for a wage that they can get uh, they can live on. It's more of an existence than really living, so to speak. Um, so I can see that could happen if the people don't stand together. But I also see a lot of people waking up to what's going on, and they're saying how the ruling classes are exploiting this and pushing their own agenda. And some of the trade union movements have also spoken words of caution, and I'm hoping that they will grow some teeth and snap back, and that the people will basically organize against what's coming. I can see more oppression coming. That's what I see on the horizon. I can see the rich folk, the elite, basically making life a lot more difficult and restricting people's lives, and basically leaving them in debt, more debt. They're basically saying, oh, we'll give you some money now, we'll give you some money now, we'll get through this, we're in this together, blah, blah, blah. But we're not really in it together, are we?
Right.
They've got their club, they're in it together, and we're not in that club.
As some poet put it, not a poet I'm familiar with, but it's been making the rounds of Twitter. We're not all in the same boat. We're just in the same storm. The boats are very different.
Yes, that's very well put it like that. But like I said, that's how I see things. I see more control, more oppression, unless the people come together, organise. We've already seen we don't need these. We don't need the rich elite to run things. We've got workers out there doing that. Workers built the cities, built the towns. We don't need the rich elite. We don't need billionaires. We don't need trillionaires. We can do this ourselves.
Not only do we not need them, they're parasites, in fact.
Absolutely, absolutely. They're the problem. They're the problem.
Paul, do you have any particular plans for the future after the borders are open? And I know it's hard to imagine at the moment, but once lots of people once again want to pack their sweaty bodies into pubs and cafes.
Ooh, I'm just going to keep on keeping on, David. Just keep on chipping away, doing what I can do, making music, making songs, and making points, and hopefully making headway.
Making headway. Paul, do you have a whistle around that you might be able to just play something for a minute? I know it's not the greatest connection, but it'd just be so nice to hear.
I do.
Would you?
I do have one. Yeah. Hold on, give me a second. Okay.
I wouldn't dare asking you to play the pipes because I know you'd have to set it up and it would take about an hour. So, but the whistle's probably more readily available.
I'll give you an air, if that's okay, called the May Morning Dew.
Perfect.
In the month of May.
Perfect.
Right.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks so much for joining me for
It's been an honor to be on your show, and it's been great to talk to you again, comrade.
Yeah, you too. I'll
You
talk to
take
you again
care.
soon. You too.
Stay safe.
Take care, Paul. And thank you all out there for joining me for this discussion with Pol Mac Adaim. Tomorrow's discussion will actually be a musical monologue, otherwise known as a concert. I'll be playing on the Facebook page of Mayworks, a Canadian network promoting the culture of the labor movement. If you want to help support my musical and live streaming efforts, you where did the text go? During this period when all of us touring musicians cannot tour, this would be most appreciated. I'm spending all of my disposable income these days on printing rent strike posters, and this is getting expensive. So your donations are welcome, and that's where they'll be going. You can make a one-off donation at paypal.me/David Rovics or become a repeat offender by joining my community-supported art program, which you can read about at davidrovics.com/subscribe or patreon.com/davidrovics. That's all for now. See you again soon here in the Matrix and eventually back out in the streets. Mutual aid will get us through. Remember, don't pay the rent.